Hey everybody, so now that we've learned about what wilderness is, both as a legal construct but also as a cultural concept, and learned some other aspects of wilderness like critiques about it, and we got a little bit of an introduction for or about what wilderness character is. In this lecture, we're really going to dig into wilderness stewardship and how that's done, which is, using this wilderness character framework that the federal land management agencies use for management and monitoring of wilderness. And we're going to really dig into that in this short lecture. So let's do it. So this lecture, we're going to really go over the wilderness character framework, and then we're going to discuss kind of briefly how the wilderness character framework can be used in both planning and management of federally designated wilderness areas. So again, we're not talking about like the cultural construct, the cultural concept of wilderness, but we're talking about it as a bureaucratic or legal entity that's managed by one of the federal land management agencies in the U.S. that's responsible for managing wilderness. So either the National Park Service, the U.S. Forest Service, the Bureau of Land Management, or the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Those are the four entities, the four federal land management agencies that manage wilderness areas. So this should look familiar. This is a slide from the last lecture. And this is South Sister Mountain. This is where I used to work. And this is a really cool area that kind of leads up to the mountain itself. So the five qualities of wilderness character are naturalness, untrammeledness, outstanding opportunities for solitude or a primitive and unconfined type of recreation, the undeveloped quality of wilderness character, and the other features of value. By the end of this lecture, we're going to know what all these mean, and we're also going to know a little bit about how they're used in planning and management by those four land management agencies responsible for wilderness stewardship. Wilderness character is going to be affected by stewardship decisions to take action or not take action by those federal land management agencies. And as again, we're going to learn, this framework can be helpful for them in describing benefits and trade-offs of different management decisions, but also just understanding how those decisions affect wilderness itself through this framework of wilderness character. So the first one is natural, so the natural quality of wilderness character. Another way to think about this is that wilderness ecological systems are substantially free from the effects of modern human civilization. Why do we do this? It's to preserve native species, to preserve ecological patterns and ecological and evolutionary processes that might be impacted too much by the presence of humans or human development or the impacts of humans. A reason why we do this is because we want to understand and learn from natural systems. So there is a scientific value for preserving this natural quality of wilderness character. Some examples of what impacts the natural quality of wilderness character. In terms of plants, things like the loss of native plants or the occurrence of non-native species. That's a big old saguaro cacti. I used to work in the saguaro wilderness in Arizona outside Tucson. And that is a native plant. It's an iconic plant. The Saguaro Wilderness and the Saguaro National Park are named after it. The park itself was established as a monument to protect that particular species. So if that species was lost, which it could be from the occurrence of bufflegrass, which is an invasive plant species that sets on fire, burns quickly, and saguaro cacti, if you don't know, are not fire resistant and have not evolved in the context of fire. So that plant could get extirpated if bufflegrass take over in certain areas. So another example, animals, so the loss of native animals or the occurrence of non-native animals. Things like air and water pollutants also affect the natural quality of wilderness character, and also ecological processes too. So things like the loss of connectivity with the surrounding land, ecological corridors being cut off by roads, by development, that kind of stuff. But also climate change effects too, which is beyond the control of the wilderness manager. The next quality of wilderness character is the untrammeled quality. And the definition, or another way to think about the untrammeled quality, is that wilderness is essentially unhindered and free from the intentional actions of modern human control or manipulation. Why does the Wilderness Act include this? The idea behind it is to manage wilderness with the utmost humility and restraint, and also to respect the autonomy or freedom or agency of nature, and really let a place be wild and free. That was the thinking behind this untrammeled word. And I've dug into the history of the Wilderness Act and actually seen Howard Zahner like cross off the word like untrampled and write untrammeled, because untrammeled was this really, really important word for him that he thought captured some of the essence of wilderness. Not the only aspect of wilderness that's important, but one aspect of it that's very important. Bunch of different actions that impact the untrammeled quality of wilderness character. So there are authorized actions that managers take that manipulate, control, or hinder the community of life. Things like suppressing fire, even lighting fire for prescribed burns, collaring wildlife, spraying weeds, pulling weeds, poisoning fish, stalking fish or wildlife, killing predators. The bucket brigade, this is an example of people who used to stock fish in lakes, just filling up buckets with fish and pouring them into lakes. There are also unauthorized actions. That is an example of an unauthorized action, but there are others too. The the pulling of saguaro cacti, the setting of fires, that kind of stuff too. There are unauthorized actions that are taken that the public does that also manipulate, control, or hinder the community of life. The third quality of wilderness character is the solitude or primitive and unconfined type of recreation quality. Another way of thinking about this is that wilderness provides outstanding opportunities for solitude, so remoteness, being alone, being sensorily kind of enraptured with the sights and sounds and feelings of nature, or primitive and unconfined type of recreation. Primitive recreation, this is non-mechanized recreation, anything from cross-country skiing to hiking to ski joring to horseback riding, but not things like mountain biking or anything that includes wheels or motors. And unconfined recreation, that speaks to a lack of rules and regulations, and the idea is to have more freedom for folks. So why, right? Primitive recreation promotes the use of traditional skills. Also, the solitude, primitive, unconfined type of recreation can help facilitate personal challenge and self-discovery. You might have emotional healing, inspiration, that kind of stuff in wilderness areas too. And that all kind of relates to the experiential aspect of wilderness, which is the solitude or primitive and unconfined type of recreation. Some examples of things that impacts this quality. So the sights and sounds of people inside of wilderness. So here we've got Yosemite National Park. Here we have a cruise ship going through or going past a wilderness area in Alaska. And here we have just a camp of folks in a wilderness area in a desert. So there are also the sights and sounds of people outside of wilderness. So this is stuff like airplanes, night skies, that kind of stuff can degrade solitude in wilderness areas. There are some facilities that decrease self-reliant recreation. So things like pit toilets, you don't have to dig a cat hole to take a poo in. Buildings, this also goes against the undeveloped quality of wilderness character, which we're going to talk about in a second. But these types of bathrooms, bathhouses, decrease self-reliant recreation. Things like bridges even do, and also little A-frame or like little cabin type things that you sometimes find in some wilderness areas that people use for camping. There's a lot along like the Appalachian Trail. Also, too, any kind of management restrictions on visitor behavior, like designated campsites, rules against campfires, rules against collecting firewood, rules about where you can and can't camp, that kind of stuff. Those rules all take away from the unconfined aspect of this quality of wilderness character. The fourth quality of wilderness character is the undeveloped quality. This is that wilderness retains its primeval character and influence and is essentially without permanent improvement or modern human occupation. Why do we preserve, or do we want to preserve this quality of wilderness character? We want to preserve places from expanding settlement and growing mechanization. This was the thinking at the time. And without these types of developments present, it was thought that this allows people or the public to feel part of the larger community of life, to feel kind of interrelated with nature, with wilderness, and whatnot. So that was kind of the thinking behind the undeveloped quality of wilderness character. Some things that impact this quality, so things like non-recreational structures or installations in wilderness, anything from scientific structures to safety structures to buildings, kind of any non-recreational structure or installation in wilderness is going to take away from this quality. The use of motor vehicles or motorized equipment, mechanical transport, all also take away from this quality of wilderness character. And also inholdings. And basically what an inholding is it's kind of like, it's not quite this, but it's kind of like privately owned land that just so happens to be in a wilderness area because that land or that cabin or that whatever was there before the wilderness was established, and it was kind of grandfathered in into the wilderness area. And sometimes those inholdings are like sold to the federal government after someone dies, or they just want to get rid of it, but not always. And you can imagine these properties are people love them, and they're part of people's families, and they're really important for folks, for certain folks. But there's not a ton of them typically in wilderness areas. The last quality of wilderness character is this other features of value. So wilderness areas might also contain ecological, geological, or other features of scientific, educational, scenic, or historical value. This is kind of like the grab bag of different things, but this quality of wilderness character really protects tangible features that are unique and integral to a wilderness area. So if you think about a wilderness area and there is this special thing about it that's intrinsic to or inherently tied to the character of that place or the meaning of that place, things like indigenous art or indigenous communication, old buildings, whether they're indigenous or like pioneer settler buildings, sometimes even things like mining and mine infrastructure is kind of integral to the character of the wilderness area. And the idea behind that is that as a manager, you want to protect these things and preserve these things, to preserve the history and also to preserve people's kind of experience with what's there. Examples of what might impact this quality of wilderness character, if it's if it's something like indigenous artifacts, people taking them from wilderness, that's illegal. You're not supposed to do that. Vandalism, that's going to degrade this quality of wilderness character. But also just the natural loss of resources from like erosion and wind and fire. If these are tangible things, then sometimes always natural processes are going to kind of degrade them over time. Some things faster than others. So now that we've talked about wilderness character, let's just really briefly talk about using it for stewardship or for planning. So the idea here is a single decision or an action by a manager might affect more than one quality, right, of wilderness character. So if you install a barrier to restrict the movement of fish, this little barrier here, you can kind of see it, not really, but zoom in close or just imagine. The decision to install the structure degrades the untrammeled quality because it prevents the free flow or movement of a species. The modified water flow degrades the natural quality because a natural process isn't really allowed to be taking place. And the presence of the structure degrades the undeveloped quality of wilderness character too because it's a structure. A decision or action may improve one quality while degrading another quality, so this kind of gets confusing, right? But for example, using herbicides to control exotic or invasive plants might improve the natural quality, but it's going to degrade the untrammeled quality. Because you're not supposed to manipulate the biophysical environment, but you're also improving the biophysical environment, so it's kind of a contradiction that's built into the law. Building a bridge might reduce impacts at a stream, so that's going to maybe improve the natural quality, but the presence of the bridge degrades the undeveloped quality of wilderness character, but also it degrades the opportunities for solitude or a primitive unconfined type of recreation because it's a facility that decreases self-reliant recreation. So those are just a couple examples of decisions or actions that might degrade one quality of wilderness character while improving another. As we saw before, there might be actions that degrade multiple qualities of wilderness character. As you can see, like these are tangible examples. This example here of spraying for bufflegrass in Saguaro National Park, or building a bridge. These examples here, or this example here of a structure in wilderness degrading multiple aspects of wilderness character. What I think is useful here is that as a manager, the wilderness character framework it kind of provides a language with which managers can understand the implications of their management actions or potential management actions, and then make informed decisions about how those actions are or are not going to affect wilderness, maybe in different ways, because we can see that sometimes an action is going to improve wilderness in some aspects, but then degrade it in other aspects. So I hope that this lecture was useful. In it, we covered wilderness character and what it was, and we also talked about how to use wilderness character in planning. In class on Wednesday, we're going to be digging into these qualities of wilderness character a little bit more through a couple more lectures, or one more lecture on wilderness character, monitoring specifically, and then we are going to do an activity in which we kind of think about monitoring, and we talk about some of the limitations and challenges associated with monitoring. And then we're going to end the class on Wednesday with a discussion about wilderness and social science and how to use social science in a wilderness context for various reasons. So yeah, I hope this was helpful. Please let me know if you have any questions. This is just a case study, or just a real-world example of a policy or law that is really important, and we're digging into it because we're going to kind of learn about the role that individual people play in implementing this law. And I think it's going to be really, really interesting for all of us to see how this law and the policies that are derived from that law manifest in different social, ecological contexts across the U.S. So thanks again, and let me know if you have questions.